Hey, what's going on, guys? Aarava here, and welcome back to my Let's Talk F1 2018 series. This one for the Alfa Romeo Sauber C37 launching today. The first of two cars that Renault will be launching later today, and there will be a video for that. So be sure to get subscribed around here for a video on the Renault. We also did a video on the Red Bull previously, and the first two cars as well. So this is the fourth car that has been launched for the 2018 season, and here it is, the brand new partnership between Alfa Romeo and Sauber in a more kind of sponsorship sort of way, but obviously kind of the first time Alfa Romeo have kind of been back in Formula One, and this is what they've presented to us with Sauber, of course. And the livery, straight away, let's just get away from that and kind of get onto the actual finer details of the car. Livery is the same livery they actually teased us with way back when they actually announced the partnership back in 2017. It looks like they just duked all of us and they unveiled their livery all the way back then because they've stuck with it, which, well, I'm not a huge fan of it. I would have preferred a little bit more red in there. Not entirely red, but just a bit more red. I've seen a lot of difference of opinion on Twitter over it. It seems like the old school F1 fans quite enjoy the very simplistic, monotone sort of look to it, whereas I think probably newer fans are kind of a little bit like, I mean, from the rear end shot, it looks exquisite, which is why I say if there was a tiny bit more red, like, you know, the red continued from the engine cover down the chassis on the top of it and just kind of on the actual, just the top of the chassis, and on the sides it was all white still, I think it would have looked a little bit nicer, a bit more interesting from the front end especially. But there you go, that's the livery. Do let me know, as always, what you guys think of the livery below. There definitely was a lot of comments below in yesterday's video on the Red Bull about that, so do let me know what you think of this one. But let's actually move into the more nitty-gritty stuff, and away from the livery, whatever you think about that, this is an interesting car from Sauber and Alfa Romeo. It's clearly a car where they're trying to be as innovative as possible, where, you know, they're trying to make that leap forward. We've got the updated Ferrari engine, remember, for this year now for Sauber for the first time. Last year they ran the previous year's Ferrari engine, so straight away they were just down on power everywhere. So now that they've got the updated PU, which, although the team principal has stated that you shouldn't, you know, fans shouldn't be thinking they're going to make a big leap forward just because of the engine. There's still lots of work to do, obviously, on the chassis side and the aero side, which, you know, obviously they're trying to do now with this car. And, you know, in certain areas this is a very interesting car compared to the ones we've seen so far. Even, you know, even compared to the Red Bull, in some areas it's a bit more interesting to look at. So let's dive in and kind of you know, suss out all the details. So as usual, we're blowing out the kind of pictures we've got from the exposure just to try and get a bit of a better idea of what's going on here. And straight away on the front of the car, you'll notice we've got the two nostrils a la Force India style there. So obviously that's going to let air straight through, and actually that air is just going to pass through these holes and effectively just get hit into these turning vanes and winglets below the car, and that's going to get affected and shoveled either towards the bargeboard area or directly underneath the car towards the floor, and all the aero underneath the floor you never see is going to use that effectively, or a lot of it might go to the bargeboard, especially if it gets hit with this this winglet and bargeboard over here. And as we make our way to the bargeboard and side pod area, as you can clearly see by the amount of red lines there, very intricate and delicately crafted area of the car, and definitely probably along with the Red Bull car a very interesting area so far compared to the other team. So if we zoom in here, we're going to start off with this inlet. Now, in yesterday's video for the Red Bull video, I said there was probably a good bet that the Red Bull car would have the tiniest side pod inlets and side pods of the entire season. Now, in terms of the inlet, I think Sauber have done a very good job at matching Red Bull almost, so kudos to them. In terms of the actual side pod though, I still think I'm going to be winning the bet, because the Red Bull car definitely still had tinier side pods and a lot more suckered in side pods, but the actual inlet itself for the Sauber is very, very small, and the first kind of half of the side pod face, if you will, is a lot smaller than we've seen compared to the Haas or the Williams car, if you will. The Red Bull car, you can see though on the shape of it, I've kind of tried to dot out the geometry essentially. You can see, if you go back and compare it to the Red Bull video I did yesterday, the Red Bull car's geometry and shape of these side pods were just so much more extremely suckered in, whereas the Sauber's got a very conventional shape to the side pod still, but the actual entry point for the inlet is tiny, and they've got it quite low down. So this little structure here is essentially the crash structure that every car has to have. It's the side impact structure. Now, Red Bull opted to put this in front of their inlet, essentially, and push back the inlet backwards. So on the Red Bull, pretty much the inlet started around here, and they had this crash structure pushed forward to about here, this point there. Sauber haven't opted for that, but they've definitely treated it different to how Williams and Haas have treated it. They've lowered the inlet itself to the very bottom face of the crash structure, and they've left this very good amount of space up above, but they've just opted to kind of craft it to the very leading edge of the actual side pod on the top there. What you can't see from this angle, though, is they've actually got a secondary small outlet just over here. You can kind of see that black part. That's where that inlet is. And so they kind of almost split the way they're trying to get air into the side pod, into the engine bay, if you will. So this inlet is maybe just going to be for something like the radiator, where the radiator will usually be housed around here. And then maybe this inlet is going to be for something like the turbo, or just a different part of the engine where they want it to get to. So we'll see that from a different angle, but very, very odd way to do that. No other team's done that, where they've gone with a very small main inlet, but then a tiny, tiny other kind of tunnel and crevice at the very top of the side pod. They've then gone for one sleek winglet, which is attached to the side pod by a Vortex Generator upright. So a lot of teams now are going away from what we used to see in the past a lot of the time on these F1 cars, would just be these uprights, which are Vortex Generators, and you'd see maybe 3 or 4 of them dotted along the top of the side pod, whereas now it looks like teams are trying to craft and kind of shape where the air is going, rather than just trying to create a bog standard vortex to try and mix the air as it goes down and attach the airflow to the top of the side pod. They're now trying more intricately to pinpoint the vortex as it spirals off the tip of this winglet. So along with Red Bull and a lot of the teams now, they're doing this kind of winglet that just streaks out, and then it's attached either to the top of the side pod by a Vortex Generator upright, or in the case of Red Bull, it just kind of hangs off in there. And then you've got this very nice, intricate, crafted area for Sauber. Unlike any of the other teams so far, we've seen Red Bull kind of copy what Mercedes did last year. Obviously, we've already noted Haas have pretty much straight copied what Ferrari did. The same for Williams, essentially. Whereas Sauber, you can clearly see they've maybe got a little bit more catching up to do in terms of their area. They're still on this kind of what maybe the likes of McLaren and Renault were on last season, where they've still got these very normal 3 upright, but it's definitely a very interesting chisel look. You can see this one is warped and twisted and angled inwards, and then this middle one, not even touching the floor, it actually dents out of the last one here. And it's almost like if you kind of imagine the air coming off these winglets, coming off the front end of the car, it's going to channel through, and they want some of the air to go on the left side, outside face of this end plate, and then some of it to go to the inside, but then get curved back in. You can see the air would probably just curve in like that and then swoop out towards the rear end of the car. And then actually for me, the way the floor also meets the main chassis and the underside tray of the car is very intriguing as well. They kind of got this dip and kind of little indent there, so it creates its own kind of leading edge winglet, if you will, as the floor meets that face, instead of just going for your normal kind of barge board right at that point of the car. And they've kind of pushed the barge board a little bit more forwards to allow that room and that space. And so they open up a very similar almost space that Red Bull had. If you go back to yesterday's video, that kind of red area I talked about in that video, they've kind of gone for that very open space to allow a lot of air to just go through this space behind these end plates as it goes through and attaches to the side of the side pod to go to the rear end of the car. And then if we move on to the top, the first team really to have a very obvious fairing and aero device on the halo. The Red Bull car actually did have a bit of a fairing on its halo device, but it was nowhere near as kind of obvious and really intricate maybe looking as Sauber's done. They've actually gone for a little winglet that, the likes of McLaren and Toro Rosso, we saw similar kind of devices like this at the Abu Dhabi test in 2017. So Sauber have opted for that, whereas Red Bull definitely did have some sort of housing on the halo, but there's no cutout winglet that they've got here. So Sauber, the first team to really show that off on a launch spec. Maybe Red Bull, we know Red Bull, they sometimes hide a lot of things, so maybe that's something Red Bull are not going to show their hand to, essentially, until pre-season testing or the Australian Grand Prix even. But with this little winglet coming off the halo, they'll be hoping to channel air to the sides of these inlets here. You can see that are going to be the main engine ones. This little inlet here on the shark fin will more or less just be a cooling slot, because we've seen a lot of times, if you remember back to the Mercedes car of last year, they almost had like a whole ridge cooling slot at the top of the shark fin. So that will probably just be for cooling in terms of just letting air out, whereas this will be for the actual inlet to let air in that the engine will actually use. And then you've got a few little uprights here on the winglet of the halo. So those will probably be little vortex generators. So any air that unfortunately for them does make its way through, hits this face of the halo and actually does go towards the engine, vortex generators they've got here will hopefully try and probably smoothen out that flow as best they can to try and get the most efficient air possible into the engine cover. Ideally, they want free stream air, untouched air to enter the engine. Unfortunately, though, the halo is high enough where it's going to start affecting things, and so I think probably what they've done is they've got little uprights there just on the halo where it meets the wing, and those are going to create little vortexes that spiral off, try and encourage mixing of the air as it enters the inlet. So we've gone for a very different angle here, just to show you off that little inlet I was talking about that you couldn't see. It was obstructed from the view, but here you got the, right at the bottom here is the usual inlet, the actual main inlet for the side pod there, so that'll go to the radiator. And then you got this tiny little one. You can see the tunnel that gets created, and probably it'll swoop down into the engine bay itself and either go to the turbo, I'm guessing, or something like that. But you can see a lot more clearly now, a lot more zoomed in, the actual winglet on this halo, and then a little up right there, maybe just to try and induce some sort of vortex to induce mixing as it goes upwards into those inlets for the main engine. But then you've got this winglet that did cover off this inlet here, and you can see they've kind of shaped it a lot like the Red Bull car outwards as it goes towards the trailing edge. And then here I've kind of just tried to dot out, this would be the theoretical kind of 3D impact structure that every car has to have on the side pod, but obviously they're treating it differently to how Red Bull have done it, and Red Bull have gone for a very different treatment to how other teams have done it so far. We move to the rear end of the car, just again, in my opinion, a very lovely shot of the car, and kind of harks back to this, you know, if you look back at the Alfa Romeo when they used to be an F1, you know, sort of that kind of just takes you back that many, whatever, 47 years-ish. So, you know, I just wish there was a little bit more red, but the rear end of the car, you know, this is the main, I've circled kind of, that's the sort of main area where a team like this will be looking to develop a little bit more. If you notice and compare it to the teams like Ferrari or Mercedes, they'll do a lot more in this area, but very neat and tidy area. No lower T-wing. You know, the Red Bull didn't have a T-wing actually there as well. Williams and I think it was Haas as well were the only two teams so far that have got a lower T-wing. Red Bull didn't launch with one, neither of Alfa Romeo Sauber, so interesting to see different kind of obviously preferences there for those two. Then we move to the side of the car, and now you can see that more intricacy of the three end plates on the side of the side pod there. And now here is where effectively, again, I'm trying to show off here. So this is essentially the height of the inlet of the side pod. You can clearly see the geometry of the actual side pod is still quite bulky actually compared to the Red Bull car. So although they've done a great job at actually making the front part of the side pod very small, it gets kind of bigger almost in the middle, then suckers in for the eventual usual Coke bottle shape. But this is where that extra inlet is, and so there'll be probably a tunnel that goes down inwards towards the actual main engine bay part. But from the side here, a lot more prominent, you can see that little winglet on the halo. And then they've got these two winglets, obviously taking some inspiration from Ferrari. Obviously, I think they had one of these winglets already there last year, but a bit of an evolution there. But what they'll try and do, obviously, is air comes through from the front, through the suspension arms, which, by the way, they've gone for a more Mercedes Toro Rosso style of a split connection into the brake ducts with the suspension arms themselves. But they'll try and just bounce the air delicately. This top winglet for sure will be channeling air to get affected by the top winglet there, and then also directly pump air into this little unit here, the top tunnel. And then this middle one will be more towards that lower, the lower inlet. You can see they kind of matched it in terms of the height there. So they have to very intricately try and shoot the air to different parts of that side pod face. And then here we've got the front view. So this little upright here on the left is where the very edge of the end plate is. So you can see, you know, fair play to Sauber. They have got some very small side pods there. Probably Red Bulls were kind of suckered in even more to around this, kind of this around line. But Sauber have done a fantastic job to try and sucker that in. And the actual inlet itself is probably just as tiny as the Red Bull car, but you can see that double-edged inlet almost. Kind of looks like they've almost got a wall split there, but that's due to the crash structure being there right in the middle. That has to be there. But you've got those two nostrils out of the Force India. Smaller nostrils than probably the Force India's gone with, but yeah, letting air pass straight through to the underside winglets. And then actually they've got these two ridges, which are almost like back to the Sauber of like F1 2012 almost, of these, when they used to have the step noses and the vanity panel of the step nose. They've almost got this tiny subtle ridge, maybe just trying to subtly keep some air in the middle of that chassis, just so as it shoots up, trying to keep it a bit more uniform. Or it could be Sauber planning an S-duct, and that's essentially where the cutout of the S-duct is going to eventually be. I mean, it wouldn't be, I wouldn't put it past them, because an S-duct has pretty much become a conventional thing almost for a lot of teams now. But also here from the front end view, you can also see the apparent lack of any appendages like we saw from the Haas or the Williams, or indeed the Red Bull, in terms of there's no kind of, you know, snow plows going off like the Haas. You can see the barge order is very much that one unit instead of the double element unit we've seen from Williams so far, or Red Bull as well. So there are certainly areas which you can already see maybe Sauber will be wanting to look into, but overall, in terms of if you look back to previous Sauber cars, maybe it's a lot more of a, it looks like, to me at least, a more ambitious attempt by Sauber. And obviously now, as I said, with the engine, they've got an updated Ferrari engine. You know, they've got this new partnership with Alfa Romeo. They've got a junior Ferrari driver in the form of Charles Leclerc, who's touted to, if he grows well enough in Formula 1 now in this first season, hopefully go on to be a top driver. They've got nowhere to hide, really, Sauber. So they've got to, hit the ground running, and, they've got to show that they're able to keep up with the pack. And, personally for me, I hope to God that they're just not there at the back trolling around. I hope they can get stuck in, and, if Leclerc or even Ericsson has a good day, they can take the fight to some of the midfield teams, hopefully. So yeah, guys, I'll be leaving it there then for this video. So that was the Alfa Romeo Sauber C37. If you guys did enjoy the video and found it informative, then do leave a like. Do get subscribed, because as I said, I've already done the previous 3 cars. Red Bull was yesterday. You guys loved that video. And then there was the Williams and the Haas. We will be doing the Renault later today, so do get subscribed for that. And then all the other cars as we go through this week, as they all launch eventually. We also do a Formula 1 podcast on this channel, so you may be interested in that. And also, if you look around clearly, I also do a lot of F1 gaming, so that may interest you if you're a general Formula 1 fan. But yeah, let me know what you thought in the comments below of the Sauber livery, and also what you just think of the actual car itself, the detailing and whatnot. Do you have a lot of high hopes for Alfa Romeo Sauber, or do you not? And do you think they'll still be remaining at the back? Let me know. But yeah, hope you guys enjoy the rest of your day, and I'll see you guys next time.